She used to mop this woman's floors. She used to kneel and wipe the marks of high heels off the marble while people watched and laughed. And tonight, in Chicago's most opulent ballroom, in front of the city's most powerful people, she descends the stairs in $1 million dress that the fashion world has never even touched. This isn't a story about revenge. This is the story of a woman who chose to disappear to find herself. And the price of that truth, no one in that room is prepared to pay. Like this post, leave a comment with the city you're viewing from. I want to know how far this story has come. And don't go anywhere, because what you're about to hear will change the way you look in the mirror every morning. The scream didn't come from a throat. It came from the room itself, that particular kind of silence that falls over a crowd when something impossible walks through the door. Not silence like peace, silence like a held breath, like 200 people collectively forgot how lungs work. Evelyn Vale counted the steps. She had counted them once before, 7 months ago, in rubber-soled cleaning shoes with a mop bucket rattling against the service elevator wall. Back then, the marble staircase of the Meridian Grand had felt like a monument to everything she wasn't supposed to touch. Tonight, in 4-inch heels she hadn't worn in years, every step felt like a deliberate punctuation mark at the end of a very long sentence. Her feet hurt. That part she hadn't planned on. She kept walking anyway. The gown moved with her the way water moves over stone. Inevitable, unhurried, absolutely certain of where it was going. Ivory silk so pale it looked like something between snow and skin. And the beads, thousands of hand-sewn diamond beads that her mother's atelier had spent 46 hours placing one by one, caught every crystal of chandelier light overhead and threw it back across the room in fragments. The effect was something between beautiful and violent, like watching a prism shatter in slow motion. Evelyn was not thinking about the gown. She was thinking about the woman standing frozen 20 feet below her at the base of the staircase. Celeste Arden had a champagne flute halfway to her lips. She hadn't moved in 4, maybe 5 seconds. Evelyn could see the exact moment the recognition hit, not of Evelyn herself, but of the dress. Celeste's world was built entirely on knowing which objects cost more than other objects, and the Valmont closing piece from Paris was the kind of object that people in her circle talked about in reverential whispers for months after the runway. One of one, never released, the kind of garment that didn't exist in the civilian world. And yet here it was, on her housekeeper. Evelyn watched Celeste's champagne flute descend slowly, mechanically, like someone had cut the power to the hand holding it. She kept walking. Dorset. 3 nights earlier, the penthouse had smelled like gardenias and money and the specific brand of entitlement that comes from never having been told no by anyone whose opinion you respected. Evelyn had been changing the linens in the East guest suite when she heard the voices drift through the glass corridor. Celeste and 3 of her friends, perched around the marble island in the kitchen, 3 bottles deep into a burgundy that cost more than Evelyn's monthly rent. She recognized the names. Priya Mehta, Sasha Connolly, Dana Foss, the triumvirate of women who orbited Celeste like decorative satellites, feeding off her certainty the way people feed off warmth in cold rooms. She's actually coming, though? That was Priya, voice climbing with amusement. I sent her an invitation. Celeste's voice was honey over gravel, smooth until it wasn't. Face to face, I watched her open it. Celeste. Dana drew the name out into something that sounded almost like a warning. What? I'm being generous. A pause, the sound of wine being poured. I told her it was a formal event. She'll show up in something from a department store clearance rack and spend the whole night looking terrified, and then she'll go home and feel grateful she was included at all. That's a perfectly good evening. Laughter. Light, careless, absolutely certain of its own safety. Evelyn stood motionless in the guest suite doorway with a folded pillowcase in both hands. She had been in rooms where she was invisible before, her whole life, in fact, before Chicago. She'd been invisible at Paris galas where her mother was the one being photographed, invisible at New York charity events where her family name opened doors but said nothing about the woman walking through them. She knew the texture of invisibility well. This was something different. This was erasure. The distinction mattered. Invisibility was simply being unseen. Erasure was being seen, assessed, and deliberately reduced. Celeste knew Evelyn was good at her work. She'd said so once, in a brief, surprised tone that suggested the compliment had caught her off guard. But usefulness and humanity were, in Celeste's internal architecture, entirely separate columns. You could be good at scrubbing tile and still be essentially furniture. Evelyn set the pillowcase down on the guest bed. She walked to the kitchen. She waited in the doorway, not invisibly, not apologetically, until the conversation stopped and all four women looked at her. "I'll be there Friday," Evelyn said. Celeste blinked. Then a smile spread across her face like slow oil. "Wonderful," she said. "Wear whatever you own. I'm sure it'll be memorable." More laughter. Evelyn nodded once and went back to work. She stripped the guest bed, remade it with fresh linens with the kind of mechanical precision that came from doing the same thing 400 times. She finished the suite, moved to the bathroom, cleaned the mirrors, replaced the towels in the folded configuration Celeste required. All the while her pulse was completely steady. She had learned in the last 7 months to let her hands do work. Her mind wasn't present for. It was the only way to get through a day in someone else's private world. You turn down the volume on your own thoughts and let muscle memory carry the weight. But on the elevator down, alone in the mirrored box with the bucket and the folded rags, she pulled out her phone, stood there for a long moment staring at a contact she hadn't used in 4 months, then pressed call. The phone rang twice before her mother picked up. "Evelyn." Not a question, not a greeting exactly. The word landed like a hand placed on a shoulder, certain, present, not going anywhere. "I need a favor," Evelyn said. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, I just, She stopped. Tried again. "There's a gala Friday, the Meridian Crown, and I need—" She closed her eyes, said it. "I need the ivory dress." The pause that followed lasted long enough that the elevator reached the lobby, and the doors opened, and Evelyn stepped out into the marble foyer without registering any of it. "The closing piece?" her mother asked. "Yes." "Evelyn, that dress is— I know what it is." Another pause, shorter this time. "Are you ready?" her mother asked. Not about the dress. They both knew that. Evelyn looked at herself in the lobby mirror. Jeans, no makeup, hair pulled back, a piece of it coming loose near her left ear. Someone's employee. Nobody's heiress. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." She heard her mother exhale something that wasn't quite a laugh. "I'll send the cars tomorrow morning." Wham! The cars arrived at 6:58 a.m. Evelyn heard them before she saw them. The low synchronized pull of multiple engines in a street where people usually drove second-hand sedans with muffler problems. She looked down from her third-floor window and counted 3 black SUVs and 1 long-haul vehicle with the matte black Valmont crest on the side panel. Her neighbor, Mrs. Delacroix, was watering her window boxes across the alley and stopped mid-tilt to stare. 4 people came up the stairs. Her mother had sent Mireille, the head stylist, a 60-year-old Algerian woman with silver braids and the unhurried confidence of someone who had dressed women for 3 decades and seen everything. Behind her came 2 assistants carrying hard-shell cases, and a man whose sole function appeared to be carrying the garment bag, which he treated with the reverence of someone transporting a very still, very expensive newborn. Mireille took one look at Evelyn's apartment and said nothing. That restraint alone told Evelyn everything. The apartment was not small so much as it was honest. Water stain on the ceiling above the kitchenette, a radiator that knocked against the wall when the heat came on, a mattress on a platform frame with no headboard, 2 pillows, bedding that came from a Target clearance sale 4 months ago, a card table serving as a desk, a second-hand armchair by the window that had given up on its original color somewhere in the 90s and settled for something between brown and grief. This was what Evelyn had chosen. Deliberately. The choice had mattered. Mireille set her cases on the card table and looked at Evelyn directly. "Sit down," she said. "We have 18 hours." The transformation was not magical. That was the part nobody understood later when people told this story and turned it into something cinematic and effortless. The truth was that it hurt in the specific way that returning to something you've abandoned always hurts, like flexing a muscle you haven't used in months and feeling the resistance before the memory. Evelyn sat in a folding chair while Mireille's assistants worked on her hair, and she stared at the opposite wall and thought about the first time she'd worn something from Valmont. She was 14. Her mother had pinned a sample chemise on her in the studio, Not because she was a model, but because Evelyn was the right height, and her mother was impatient, and the fitting model wasn't due for another hour. She remembered standing very still while her mother crouched and marked the fabric and said nothing for 10 minutes, entirely absorbed in the problem of the hem, and Evelyn had felt, in that silence, both seen and invisible at the same time. Like being inside a painting while it was being made. It was the closest she had ever felt to her mother. It was also the first time she understood that her mother's love was real and complete and expressed in a language Evelyn sometimes struggled to speak. "Stop clenching your jaw," Mireille said, without looking up from the makeup case. Evelyn unclenched her jaw. "You've been grinding it for the last hour. You'll give yourself a headache. I'm not nervous." "I didn't say nervous." Mireille picked up a brush. "I said clenching." The ivory gown was the last thing they put on her. Mireille unzipped the garment bag herself, which she only did for certain pieces, and drew it out slowly, the silk whispering against its covering like something waking up. The assistant stepped back automatically, giving the garment room to exist. Evelyn, standing in her apartment in just her undergarments and with her hair finished and her face made up, watched it emerge and felt something complicated move through her chest. It was more beautiful than she remembered from the runway. Or maybe she was older now and understood it differently. "Arms up," Mireille said. Evelyn raised her arms. The silk fell over her like water finding its level. Mireille did the last hook herself, standing behind Evelyn, and then turned her to face the full-length mirror they'd propped against the closet door. Evelyn looked, didn't speak for a long moment. "Your mother included something," Mireille said, and held out a card. The handwriting was her mother's. Precise, slightly slanted, written with the same pen she'd used to correct fabric sketches for 30 years. "You were never lost. You were only quiet. Come home when you're ready." Evelyn folded the card, put it in the small clutch Mireille handed her without comment. "Ready?" Mireille asked. "No," Evelyn said. She picked up the clutch and walked to the door. The Meridian Grand's ballroom was the kind of room that had been designed specifically to make you feel inadequate unless you belonged in it. 26-foot ceilings, 7 original crystal chandeliers, a floor of white Carrara marble that reflected everything happening above it like a second, upside-down world. The walls held original oil paintings that each individually cost more than most people made in a decade, positioned at intervals calculated to make you feel that someone with taste had made deliberate choices about your visual experience. Which they had. That was the point. Evelyn had been inside this room before, on her knees cleaning the baseboards. The memory arrived without her permission as she stepped from the car, and she let it sit there for exactly 3 seconds before she set it aside and walked forward. The door attendant saw the dress before he saw her face. She watched his expression go through 4 distinct phases in the space of 1 second. Professional neutrality, involuntary recognition, recalibration, professional neutrality again. He opened the door wider than he probably intended to. The ballroom noise washed over her first, the layered murmur of 200 carefully cultivated social performances happening simultaneously. Crystal touching crystal, heels on marble. The orchestral quartet tucked in the far corner producing something sophisticated and ignorable. Evelyn walked to the top of the staircase. She didn't pause there for effect. She paused because her heel caught slightly on the top step, and she needed a half second to get her balance back. Later, people would describe it as a dramatic entrance. It wasn't. It was physics and 4-inch heels and a floor that had been buffed to a dangerous shine. But the room saw it differently. And room's reality, in spaces like this one, was the only reality that counted. She started down the stairs. The first person to notice was a fashion editor from the Chicago Tribune, whose name Evelyn didn't know, but whose expression she would remember for years afterward. The particular look of a person whose professional expertise has just been directly confronted by something that shouldn't exist outside a museum. His mouth opened slightly, stayed that way. Then the woman beside him looked, and the man beside her. The silence moved outward from them in concentric rings, spreading across the ballroom floor like the dress's scattered light. Conversations dying in sequence, heads turning. The quartet kept playing for another 12 bars before even the cellist noticed and lost his place. And at the base of the staircase, 165 centimeters of Chicago social architecture stood perfectly still with a champagne flute in her hand and watched Evelyn Vale descend in the dress that was supposed to be impossible to own. Celeste's face went through something that Evelyn couldn't fully read from that distance. But she saw enough. She reached the bottom step, stood on the same marble floor she had cleaned on her hands and knees 5 months ago. A Tuesday morning, with a herbal cleaning solution that had left a faint lemon smell in the air for 2 hours afterward. She remembered being proud of how clean it had come out. She had been genuinely proud of that. The silence had weight now. It pressed against her from all sides. A held collective breath from 200 people who understood that something had shifted but hadn't yet processed what or how or what it meant for them. Evelyn stood in it. Let it sit. Then a woman she didn't recognize, silver-haired, sharp eyes, wearing a gown that suggested she didn't need to try, walked toward her with the unhurried directness of someone who was accustomed to simply having access to whatever interested her. That gown, the woman said without preamble. Where did it come from? And Evelyn, for the first time in 7 months, answered honestly. My mother designed it. The woman blinked once. Your mother? Serafina Vale, Evelyn said. I'm her daughter. The silver-haired woman stared at her, and then, from somewhere to Evelyn's left, she heard the sound of a champagne flute hitting the marble floor. Not shattering, just landing. The small, crystalline, very final sound of something slipping from a hand that had forgotten to hold on. She didn't need to turn to know whose hand it was. The name was already moving through the room, passed from mouth to mouth in escalating waves. Vale Serafina. Vale. That's Serafina Vale's daughter. She's been working here in Chicago. Did you know? Did anyone know? And the ballroom that had been cold and hierarchical and entirely certain of itself 60 seconds ago began to come apart at the seams with the specific chaos that erupts when a room full of powerful people simultaneously realizes the map they've been using is wrong. Evelyn stood in the middle of it, perfectly still. Somewhere behind the noise and the movement and the restructuring of 200 social calculations, she was aware of Celeste. Not looking at her, not approaching, just present, in the way that a wound is present. You don't have to look directly at it to know it's there. She thought about that penthouse kitchen, the sound of that laughter. Wear whatever you own. The thing was, and this was the part that Celeste had never understood, could never have understood from where she was standing. Evelyn wasn't angry anymore. She had been. 3 nights ago, in that elevator, staring at her own reflection and pressing call, she had been incandescent with it. A clean, white-hot fury that had no debris, no confusion, just pure clarity of feeling. But it had burned itself out somewhere between the stylist's chair and the top of that staircase. What remained was something quieter and harder to name. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Not satisfaction either. This wasn't revenge, had never been intended as revenge, even if it looked like it from the outside. It was something closer to testimony. A correction of the record. A statement. Not to Celeste, not to the room, but to the part of herself she'd been slowly suffocating for 7 months. That she had not, in fact, ceased to exist. A hand touched her arm. The silver-haired woman again, leaning in with an expression that mixed respect with naked curiosity. Will you speak with me? She asked. I'm Harriet Bloom. I run the Bloom Foundation. What you've just done, I have some ideas I think you need to hear. Evelyn looked at her, considered. In a moment, she said. She turned for the first time to look directly at Celeste. Celeste stood 10 feet away with no champagne glass now, and both hands pressed flat against the sides of her thighs, the way a person stands when they're trying very hard to hold themselves in one piece. Her 3 friends had drifted. Priya was near the bar, very busy with her phone. Sasha had disappeared entirely, and Dana was watching from a distance with an expression that seemed to be trying to calculate which outcome was safest for Dana. Celeste's eyes met Evelyn's, and for 1 second, not long enough to mean anything yet, but long enough to register, something moved across Celeste Arden's face that Evelyn had never seen there before in 7 months of proximity. Something that looked uncomfortably like fear. Not of Evelyn, of herself. But that was the thing about moments of recognition. They never arrived alone. Evelyn would learn this 40 minutes later, when Damien Arden arrived. She had been deep in conversation with Harriet Bloom and 2 museum directors whose names she'd been given 3 times, and still hadn't retained when she felt the room change pressure again. That particular atmospheric shift that happens when someone with genuine authority walks in. Not performed authority, not purchased authority. The real thing, which is rare and moves differently. Damien Arden was 51 and looked 43 in the specific way that came from sleeping well and having done genuinely difficult things. He'd built his real estate empire from a $200,000 bank loan and 12 years of working 7-day weeks. And the people who worked for him talked about him the way people talk about someone who is demanding but fair, which in practice meant he expected more than most and delivered on every promise he'd made. Evelyn had met him twice, both times briefly, in the penthouse entryway when he was coming or going. He'd greeted her by name both times, which in her experience was not universal among people who employed domestic staff. She watched him cross the ballroom toward his wife. She watched the conversation happen from across the room. Couldn't hear it, didn't need to. She could read the architecture of it, the way Celeste's body angled toward explanation, and Damien stayed entirely still. The way his stillness wasn't coldness, it was something worse. The way a person stands when they are very carefully making sure they say the right thing instead of the true thing. Then his posture shifted, and Evelyn understood she was watching the moment when he stopped being careful and said the true thing. She turned away. That part wasn't hers. "Sorry," she said to Harriet Bloom. "You were saying about the foundation." "The Invisible Line Initiative," Harriet said, watching her with assessment she didn't bother to disguise. "We've been trying to find the right partnership for 2 years. Someone who can give it weight, story, not just money." She paused. "Are you interested in building something that actually matters?" Evelyn looked at the woman across the table, at the careful directness in her face, at the particular way her eyes held still when she asked a question, the way people's eyes hold still when they already believe the answer is yes and are just waiting for confirmation. She thought about the Valmont studio in Paris, about her mother's handwriting on a card she was currently carrying in a small ivory clutch, about a Tuesday morning and a mop bucket and a marble floor that came out clean and the specific satisfaction of a job finished, about a dress with names sewn into the lining, names she hadn't chosen yet. "Tell me more," Evelyn said. Harriet Bloom smiled for the first time. Across the ballroom near the south corridor entrance, Evelyn caught a glimpse of Celeste Arden slipping away through a side door. Alone, without her satellites, without the social armor that had been, apparently, load-bearing. Evelyn watched the door close behind her, and felt nothing simple. What she felt was more complicated than satisfaction, older than anger, and heavier than either. The specific gravity of a story that wasn't finished yet, that maybe wouldn't be finished tonight, that required something from her she hadn't fully decided yet whether she was willing to give. She turned back to Harriet. "Start from the beginning," she said. The chandeliers threw their light across 200 recalibrated worlds, and somewhere in the margins of all of it, a question Evelyn hadn't been asked yet was already forming. Not in the ballroom, not in any conversation she was currently having, but in the quiet of a penthouse apartment where a woman was standing alone for the first time and asking herself the kind of questions that only silence could generate. She didn't know that yet. She would find out in 3 days. When Celeste Arden knocked on her door. The knock came at 7:43 in the morning. Not a polite knock, not the measured two-tap knock of someone who has considered whether they should be here and decided yes. This was the knock of someone who had been standing outside the door for a while already, working up to it, and had finally just committed before they could think themselves out of it. 3 raps, uneven spacing, the third one harder than the first 2, like the hand had surprised itself. Evelyn was already awake. She'd been awake since 5, sitting in the second-hand armchair by the window with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, watching the street below fill with the particular early morning population of a neighborhood that worked for a living. Delivery trucks. Dog walkers. A man in paint-splattered work pants waiting at the bus stop with the specific stillness of someone who had done this same thing at the same hour so many times that the waiting had become its own kind of sleep. She hadn't slept well. That wasn't surprising. What surprised her was the nature of the sleeplessness. She'd expected the residue of the gala, the noise of it, the light, the specific exhaustion of performing a version of yourself you'd set aside. What kept her awake instead was quieter. The look on Celeste's face when their eyes had met across the ballroom floor. Not the fear part. Before the fear. The half second before that, when recognition had moved across Celeste's features like weather, not recognition of the dress, not recognition of who Evelyn's mother was, but something more fundamental. The look of someone seeing a person they had decided was not a person, and discovering the decision was wrong. Evelyn had seen that look before. She'd seen it in Paris, in Milan, in New York. In every room where her mother's name opened doors, and people recalculated her worth in real time based on new information. She had always hated that look, the recalculation, the way value could be assigned and revoked and reassigned based on what a person was attached to rather than what they were. What she hadn't expected was to see it and feel, underneath the familiar anger, something that was almost not pity, not yet, but adjacent to it, a tiredness that wasn't hers alone. The knock came again. 4 raps this time, definite. Evelyn set down the cold coffee, crossed the apartment in 12 steps. She knew the count by now. This place was small enough to know by count, and opened the door. Celeste Arden was standing in the hallway in jeans. Not designer jeans, or maybe they were designer jeans and they just looked like normal jeans because there was no performance behind them today. No scarf, no jewelry except small gold studs in her ears. Her hair was down and slightly uneven, like she'd dried it without looking in a mirror, which for Celeste was the equivalent of anyone else walking through a wall. No makeup. No, or enough makeup applied quickly enough that it was doing the minimum, covering the worst of whatever the night before had cost her, not constructing anything. She looked like herself, whatever that actually meant. Evelyn realized she'd never seen it before. I drove around for 40 minutes first, Celeste said before Evelyn could say anything. Her voice was different. The honey and gravel was gone or buried. What was underneath it was rougher, less practiced. I kept changing my mind. Evelyn looked at her. I still haven't stopped changing my mind, Celeste added, but I'm here. So. A beat passed. Evelyn stepped back from the door. Celeste came in. She stopped 2 steps inside the apartment and did what Muriel had done. Took it in. But where Muriel's silence had been professional discretion, Celeste's was something different. She stood very still and looked at the water stain on the ceiling, the bare mattress, the card table, the armchair with its surrendered color. Looked at the single shelf of paperback books, spines creased from multiple readings. Looked at the 2 coffee mugs on the kitchenette counter, one of which had a hairline crack running from the handle that Evelyn hadn't replaced because it still worked. You really lived like this, Celeste said. Not a question. The same thing she'd said in Evelyn's memory. But here, in the actual room, with actual air and actual light between them, it landed differently. It wasn't judgment. It was something closer to confrontation with evidence. The face a person makes when a theory they were comfortable holding at a distance is suddenly 3-dimensional and in the room. I chose it, Evelyn said. Celeste turned to look at her directly. Why? Evelyn didn't answer right away. She went to the kitchenette and picked up the less cracked mug and poured coffee, fresh pot, she'd made it at 6:30, and set it on the card table without offering it. Then she pulled the single chair out and sat in it, which left Celeste with the armchair or standing, and Celeste, after a moment's pause that was visible and honest about being a pause, sat on the bare edge of the mattress, which was also, Evelyn noted, the first time Celeste Arden had sat on a mattress without a 700 thread count sheet between her and it in probably years. You asked why I lived like this, Evelyn said. Yes. You're assuming it was a test. Celeste looked at her. Wasn't it? Partly. Evelyn wrapped both hands around her own mug, not because she was cold, but because it gave her hands something to do that wasn't visibly deliberate. But tests are still about other people, what you're trying to find out about them, or yourself through them. This wasn't only that. Then what was it? I needed to know if I was real without the infrastructure. She said it flat, factual, not dramatic. My whole life, everything I was came preloaded. The name, the address, the accounts, the invitations. Take all that away and there's a question left. I needed to answer it. Celeste stared at her. And? I'm real, Evelyn said, still figuring out what for. Silence in the apartment. The radiator knocked against the wall once, the building's version of punctuation. Celeste looked down at the coffee mug on the card table, didn't reach for it. Damien said something to me last night, she said. Evelyn waited. He said the problem wasn't that you turned out to be important. He said the problem was how I treated someone I believed wasn't. She delivered it like she was reading from a transcript, the words exact and separate from each other. He was very quiet when he said it. Damien is always quiet when he's most angry. That's how I know. A pause. I've known him for 14 years. You'd think I'd have figured out how to read it faster. What did you say back? I didn't. Celeste's jaw moved. I couldn't. Because the thing about a true statement is there's no response to it. You can't argue the framing because the framing is just what happened. I was rude to you for months, casually, the way you're rude to a lamp. She said it without softening it. Evelyn gave her credit for that. You corrected my posture, Evelyn said, while I was serving wine to your guests. Celeste closed her eyes briefly. You discussed my cleaning technique while I was still in the room. I know. You told people I was the new girl. Not my name, just the new girl. For 4 months. Celeste's hands pressed together in her lap. I know. Your name is Evelyn, Evelyn said. I know you know my name. You used it the first day and then you stopped. That's not an accident. That's a choice people make when they're establishing what someone is in relation to them. The room was very still. I know, Celeste said. Her voice had gone thinner. Not smaller, thinner, the way a wire goes when there's too much tension on it. I know all of that. I came here because... She stopped. Started again. I came here because last night after Damien said what he said, I went into the guest bathroom of our suite, the one that faces the park. You've cleaned it. You know the one. And I sat on the floor for probably 20 minutes, on the tile. Just sat there. Evelyn said nothing. I kept thinking about what my face looked like when you walked down those stairs. I kept running it back. And the thing I kept getting stuck on, Celeste's voice changed register again, was that my first thought when I saw the dress was about me, not about you, about what it meant for me that you had that dress. I wasn't thinking, who is this woman? Why did I not know this? What have I been doing? I was thinking, how does this look for me? What is everyone thinking about me right now? She looked at Evelyn with something in her eyes that was uncomfortable to look at directly. That's what I am. That's what you've learned to be, Evelyn said. Don't! Celeste's voice cracked on it, sharp and involuntary. Don't do that. Don't make it easier than it is. I don't want that. I came here because I need to... She stopped again, pressed the back of her hand briefly against her upper lip, gathered. I came here because what I did to you was wrong, not complicated, wrong. And because I have no framework for that. None. I've lived in a world where the way I treated you was normal, expected, required almost. And I need to understand that's not acceptable. I need someone to tell me it's not acceptable without immediately making it okay again. Evelyn looked at her for a long time. Outside, the bus arrived at the stop below. The man in paint-splattered pants got on. The bus pulled away with a hydraulic exhale. It's not okay, Evelyn said. What you did wasn't okay. Celeste looked like she'd been struck and relieved simultaneously. It won't be okay because you came here. It won't be okay because you feel bad. Feeling bad about the right things doesn't retroactively correct them. Evelyn's voice was even, not cold, even. I'm not going to tell you you're a good person who made mistakes. You may be a good person. I don't know you well enough to say. But what I do know is that your behavior toward me was a choice, and it was a pattern, and patterns don't come from nowhere. Celeste's hands had gone white at the knuckle. So here's what I'll give you, Evelyn said. I'll tell you the thing that none of the people in your life are probably going to tell you because telling you makes their situation complicated. She paused. Let the weight of it settle. You weren't cruel to me because I was weak. You were cruel to me because you thought kindness should be earned. That's the sickness, not the rudeness, the philosophy behind it. The silence that followed was different from the silences before, thicker, more inhabited. Celeste sat with it, didn't move, didn't speak for long enough that Evelyn began to wonder if she was even going to. Then Celeste said very quietly, I don't know how to fix that. No, Evelyn said. You don't. Not quickly. Another stretch of quiet. Are you going back? Celeste asked. To Paris. In 2 days. Celeste nodded slowly. And the work you were doing, the Bloom Foundation thing. Harriet Bloom spoke to me this morning, actually. She mentioned your conversation. Evelyn's eyes sharpened slightly. What did she say? She asked if I'd be interested in supporting it, financially. Celeste's voice took on a careful tone that told Evelyn she was measuring her words now. She said you were considering something, a collection, a show, something that involved, she paused, domestic workers. Evelyn was quiet. She was fishing, Celeste said. For my reaction, I understood that. I think she wanted to know if I'd write a check just to smooth over what happened, or if I actually… She stopped. Tried again. I told her I needed to talk to you first. The morning light had shifted, angling lower through the window. It caught the dust on the card table surface and made it visible, all those small particles suspended in ordinary air. You don't owe me anything, Evelyn said. Not participation, not money, not redemption. I know. This isn't… I didn't come to Chicago to build something you'd eventually fund. That's not the architecture. I know that too. Celeste looked at her steadily. I'm not trying to buy anything. I understand that I can't. She exhaled. I want to do something that isn't nothing. I've spent 41 years doing nothing about the things I've been complicit in, and I'm tired. A brief, humorless exhale. That's selfish, probably. Wanting to act because I'm tired of my own conscience. But I don't have a better reason. I don't think I get a better reason. I think I just have to work with the one I have. Evelyn studied her. The woman sitting on the edge of her bare mattress in jeans and small gold earrings and borrowed honesty was not the woman who had stood in that kitchen 3 nights ago with a champagne glass and a performance of casual cruelty that had required no effort at all because it came from somewhere structural, somewhere built over decades by a world that had consistently rewarded her for it. This was not that woman, or that woman stripped of her architecture. Evelyn wasn't sure which, and she was aware, with a clarity she hadn't expected to feel at 7:50 in the morning, that whatever she said next would determine something. Not just about Celeste, about the project, about what the invisible line would actually be, structurally, who it would include, what it would owe, what it would cost. She picked up her cold coffee, found it still undrinkable, and set it back down. There's a woman, she said. Her name is Mrs. Delacroix. She lives across the alley. She's been watering those window boxes every morning for the entire time I've lived here. She worked as a hotel cleaner for 25 years, 3 kids, all of them college educated. She's 67 now, and she can't fully straighten her back because of what the work did to it. Evelyn looked at Celeste directly. She doesn't know who I am. She's never asked. She just waves occasionally. When she catches me looking, Trace Buttram. Celeste was listening with her whole body. The quality of attention she was giving was different from the Celeste of the penthouse. Not managed, not performing engaged and listening, just actually present. The collection is going to be named for people like her, Evelyn said. Not inspired by, named for. Their actual names, sewn into actual garments, worn on an actual runway. In a room where the front row is reserved for the people who are usually cleaning the floors of rooms like that. She paused. I'm not asking for your money. I'm not asking for your involvement. I'm asking you to understand what it is before you decide anything. Because I will not let it be misused. Not by anyone. Celeste absorbed this. What does misused mean in this context? It means I will not let it become a philanthropy performance. A tax write-off with good press. A way for the people who created the problem to feel comfortable claiming the solution. Her voice had an edge to it now. Not anger, but precision. The edge of a very specific thought. If you're involved, it has to be as someone who is genuinely changed by it, not performing change for the benefit of a reputation. Celeste held her gaze. How would you know the difference? I wouldn't at first, Evelyn said. Neither would you. Another silence. This one different again. More uncertain, more genuinely open. Celeste reached out and picked up the coffee mug from the card table. Took a sip, made a brief face at the temperature, and drank it anyway. I need to tell you something, she said. About why I invited you to the gala. I know why. You know the surface reason. Celeste set the mug down carefully. You don't know what was underneath it. Evelyn waited. I noticed you, Celeste said. From the beginning. Not the way I pretended not to notice you. I mean, I actually noticed you. You moved through that apartment like you were solving a problem every time. There was a quality to your attention that was, I don't have a word for it. It bothered me. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but something in her went very still. People who work for me don't usually, Celeste stopped, pressed her lips together, rejecting the sentence. Tried again. I'm used to people who are there and not there simultaneously. You were just there, completely there. And you never looked at me the way people usually do, not scared, not impressed, not performing for me, just present and entirely somewhere I couldn't reach. A pause. I didn't like it. So you tried to reduce me? Yes. The word fell out plainly. No apology in it, no performance. Just, yes, that's what I did. Evelyn looked at the window. At Mrs. Delacroix's building across the alley, window boxes empty this early, waiting for the morning water that hadn't arrived yet. That's more honest than I expected, she said. I've been awake since 1 a.m., Celeste said. I think I'm past the point of being strategic about it. It was almost funny. Not funny enough to laugh at, but close. Evelyn felt the corner of something in her chest loosen fractionally. Not forgiveness. Something earlier than forgiveness. The recognition that the person across from her was a person, complicated and bad at some things, and genuinely struggling with something real, and that this did not cancel out what she'd done, and also did not mean that Evelyn owed her anything easy. Both things. At the same time, I leave Thursday morning, Evelyn said. If you want to be involved in the invisible line, here's what I need from you. Not money first. I need you to spend 1 week working with someone from the labor pool the collection represents. Not supervising, working, side by side. And then I need you to write, not for publication, not for anyone else, a private account of what that week teaches you, about yourself, about the world you've built. If what you write is honest, we talk further. If it's polished and constructed to make you look good, I'll know. And we don't speak again. Celeste stared at her. That's not a punishment, Evelyn said. It's a prerequisite. You want to understand something. That's how you understand it. A long beat. Celeste's jaw worked slightly, the way it did Evelyn had noticed, when she was processing something she hadn't decided yet whether to accept. Okay, Celeste said. Quiet. Clean. Okay. Celeste stood from the mattress, straightened slightly, the automatic posture correction of a woman who had been doing it for 41 years. Then she stopped, let her shoulders drop to where they actually were. She looked around the apartment one more time. The water stain, she said. Did you ever report it? Building super said it was cosmetic. Is it? Probably not. Celeste nodded at that, the nod of someone filing something away. She moved toward the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. Evelyn? Said it like a weight being set down. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't... I know, Evelyn said. Go. Celeste left. The door closed with its usual soft, slightly sticky resistance. The frame had warped slightly in winter and never entirely recovered, and the apartment went quiet in a new way. Not empty, just altered. Evelyn sat for a while. Then she picked up her phone and called Harriet Bloom. She came to see me, she said when Harriet picked up. I know. Harriet didn't sound apologetic about the earlier conversation with Celeste. Evelyn hadn't expected her to be. The condition stands, Evelyn said. If she's involved, she earns it. No shortcuts. Understood. And Harriet? Evelyn looked at the window, at the light that had fully arrived now, filling the apartment with the particular gold of a late autumn Chicago morning that would last about an hour before the clouds came back. Get me in front of the Valmont board next week. I have a proposal, and I need it heard by people who can actually move on it. A brief pause on the other end. You're ready to go public. I'm ready to build something, Evelyn said. Public is just the part that makes it real. She hung up. The apartment sat around her. The water stain, the cracked mug, the books with their soft broken spines. 7 months of a life she'd chosen and would now be leaving. She looked at all of it with the specific attention of someone beginning to memorize, not because they expect to miss the thing, but because they want to carry the lesson intact. Then her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. 4 words. "We need to talk." And beneath them, a name she hadn't heard in 18 months. A name that put a cold, clean line of alarm straight down her spine, because the person attached to it was someone who had sworn, the last time they'd spoken, that they would never be in contact again unless what they had found was real enough to act on. The person was her mother's attorney, and the thing they had been quietly investigating for 18 months was whether the Valmont Atelier empire had been built on a theft. She stared at the text for longer than she needed to. 4 words. A name. That was all. But the specific combination of them, the name, the brevity, the "we need to talk" construction that people only use when what they have to say is too heavy for text and too urgent to wait for the right moment, was doing something to the air in the apartment, making it thinner, the way air gets in the minutes before something breaks. Marcus Hale. Evelyn had met him twice in person. Both times in her mother's Paris offices, a corner conference room with glass walls and a view of the Seine that her mother had chosen specifically because the view calmed her during difficult conversations. Marcus had not been calmed by the view. He was a litigation attorney who operated at the intersection of intellectual property and corporate law, and in Evelyn's limited experience of him, he had the particular energy of a man who had learned to be very still because the things he spent his time near were volatile. He was 54, gray at the temples. He had a habit of folding his hands on the table in front of him and looking at the space between them when he was about to say something he'd rather not say. 18 months ago, Serafina Vale had called Evelyn into that glass conference room and introduced Marcus Hale with the sentence that Evelyn had spent the subsequent year and a half trying not to think about too hard. There are some questions about the archive, about where certain foundational designs originated. Marcus is looking into it quietly. Quietly. That word had done a lot of work. Evelyn had asked one question. 1. How foundational? Her mother had looked at the Seine. Marcus had looked at his hands. Neither of them had answered. And then, 18 months of silence, broken by 4 words at 7:58 on a Thursday morning in a Chicago apartment she was leaving in 2 days. She called him back. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been holding the phone. "I need you to come to Paris," he said. "No preamble. I'm already coming Thursday. I need you there tomorrow." The cold line down her spine went a degree colder. "What did you find?" A pause. The pause of a man who had practiced how to deliver something and was deciding whether the phone was the right instrument for it. "Not on the phone," he said. "Marcus." Her voice came out flat and absolutely serious. "I need you to give me something right now. One thing. A direction." Another pause, longer. She heard him exhale. The specific exhale of someone releasing the decision they'd already made. "The Maison Corot Archive," he said. 1987 to 1994. The name meant nothing to her. She said so. "It will," Marcus said. "Come tomorrow, please." He hung up. Evelyn stood in the middle of her apartment with her phone in her hand and the morning light going golden across the card table and tried to locate the thing she was feeling. It wasn't fear exactly. Fear was too simple. It was the feeling of standing at the top of a staircase in the dark and not knowing how many steps there were. She booked the flight 40 minutes later. Early morning departure. She'd be in Paris by nightfall. She did not call her mother. The flight was 8 hours and she slept for none of them. She tried once, somewhere over the Atlantic, folding her jacket against the window and closing her eyes with the determined resignation of someone who understood that the next 24 hours required a functional mind. Sleep declined to arrive. What arrived instead was the specific wakefulness of a mind that has been given a partial problem and will not rest until it has the rest of the pieces, even when the rest of the pieces aren't available yet. Maison Corot. She'd looked it up in the 2 hours between Marcus's call and the car to the airport. It took longer than it should have, which told her something in itself, that the name had been allowed to fade, to sink, to become the kind of reference that existed in footnotes rather than main text. What she found was sparse. A French fashion house. Small, independent, founded 1979 by a designer named Olivier Courreau, who was by all accounts considered a minor talent with a specific and original visual language, particularly in structural draping, the technique of building garments from their architecture outward rather than from the surface in. The house had closed in 1994. Olivier Courreau had died in 2003. There was a brief obituary in a French fashion journal. It mentioned no surviving family. It mentioned, in a single subordinate clause, that his archive had been sold to a private collector after the house closed. Evelyn had read that sentence 4 times. Sold to a private collector. She knew, because she had grown up watching her mother work, that the Valmont aesthetic was built on exactly one technical signature above all others. The thing that made Valmont different from every other luxury house. The thing that reviewers had tried to describe for 30 years using words like architecturally inevitable and structurally pure, and as if the body demanded the fabric and not the other way around. Structural draping. She stared at the seat back in front of her for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and looked at photographs of Maison Courreau's 1987 collection, the last one the archive had clear documentation of, and held what she saw in her mind next to what she knew about Valmont's foundational work from 1991, the collection that had launched her mother's name into the international conversation, the collection that Serafina Vale had described in 100 interviews as the moment she found her voice. She closed the laptop. The plane flew east through dark. Marcus Hale met her at the airport himself. That told her everything about the severity before he said a word. Marcus Hale did not meet people at airports. He had 2 assistants and a car service for exactly that function. And the fact that he was standing in the arrivals hall in a coat he'd clearly put on in a hurry, holding a coffee he hadn't drunk, looking like a man who had been awake longer than she had, all of that was its own communication. He saw her come through the doors. His face did the thing it did, the thing she'd noticed before, where it went very deliberately neutral to compensate for whatever the actual reaction was. "Car's outside," he said. They didn't speak in the car, not because there was nothing to say, because the driver was present, and because some conversations require a room with a door that closes. The offices were empty at this hour. It was just past 7 in the evening, Paris time, and the building had gone to its nighttime configuration, half the lights on, the cleaning staff moving through the upper floors. Marcus led her past the reception area and through the corridor to the glass conference room and closed the door, pulled the blinds on the interior window, sat down. Evelyn sat across from him, didn't take off her coat. "Show me," she said. He opened his laptop, turned it to face her. The screen showed a scanned document, fragile, the paper clearly old, the handwriting in French in faded blue ink. Beside it, a second scan. A photograph. The photograph was of a garment. Structural, deliberate. The neckline achieved through an internal architecture that Evelyn recognized the way she recognized her own reflection. The draping falling from the shoulder in a movement that was specific. Absolutely specific to a technique she had watched her mother demonstrate dozens of times. The technique her mother had described, in print, in interviews, as her own discovery. Her breakthrough. The thing she'd arrived at alone, through years of failure and experiment, in a studio in Lyon in 1990. The handwriting on the document was dated 1987. The name at the top was Olivier Courreau. Evelyn stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at Marcus. How much of it? The structural draping signature is documented in the Courreau archive from 1987 through 1993. Your mother launched Valmont in 1991. The first collection used the technique in 7 garments. He paused. The archive was acquired in 1994 by a holding company. The holding company was registered in Luxembourg. It took me 14 months to trace it. He folded his hands on the table, looked at the space between them. The holding company is owned by your mother. The room was very quiet. She bought it, Evelyn said. Yes. She bought his archive, and then the technique stopped being documented anywhere outside of Valmont. Yes. Evelyn stood up, walked to the window. The blinds were closed, so there was nothing to look at, just pale linen slats holding the dark outside at bay. But she stood there anyway because she needed to be upright and moving, even 3 steps. Olivier Corot died in 2003, she said, of cardiac arrest. He'd been in poor health since the late 90s. The house closing, Marcus stopped, started again. There's a record of a legal consultation in 1994, a Parisian IP firm. He apparently consulted about potential action. A pause. He didn't pursue it. Why not? I don't know. The attorney is deceased. The records are partial. He said the next sentence with the care of a man placing a live thing down gently. But the timing of the archive sale and the consultation are within the same 4-month window. Evelyn put her hand flat against the linen slats of the blinds, felt the slight give of them under her palm. Her mother, Seraphina Vale, who had written, "You were never lost on a card and sent an ivory gown across an ocean," who had built an empire on the specific, original visual language of a man who had died quietly in his late 50s with no surviving family and no house, who had given hundreds of interviews about the loneliness of artistic discovery, the specific courage of trusting your own vision, the way true work comes from somewhere no one else can reach, who had said in a 2018 profile that Evelyn had read on a Paris train and felt genuinely proud of. I found the technique in failure. Years of failure. And then one morning I understood how the body and the fabric could negotiate, and everything changed. Evelyn took her hand off the blinds. "Does she know you found this?" she asked. "No. You came to me first. You asked me to." His voice was careful. 18 months ago. You said, "If you find something real, come to me before you go to her." She had said that. She remembered the specific quality of her own voice when she'd said it, the voice of someone asking for something they weren't sure they actually wanted. She turned from the window and looked at him. What does real mean in terms of exposure? Marcus set his folded hands flat on the table. If the Corot estate had living heirs, they would have a substantial claim, potentially existential for Valmont. He paused. But there are no heirs. Olivier Corot had no children, no siblings. The estate was dissolved. There is no legal claimant. Then legally, your mother is protected. The statute of limitations on any action has long passed. The holding company structure is legitimate. The acquisition was documented. He looked at her steadily. There is no legal case. There is only the truth. The truth. Evelyn sat back down, pulled her coat tighter around her, not because the room was cold. The truth was that Valmont, the name she had been born inside, the empire that had shaped the entire geography of her childhood, the institution to which she had just been preparing to attach the invisible line, and everything it stood for, was built on a foundation that belonged to a man who had died without credit, without justice, without anyone to speak for him. The truth was that her mother's famous technique, the signature that had made Valmont, was not her mother's. The truth was that Evelyn had spent 7 months in Chicago, attempting to understand how invisible people were made and erased and replaced by more legible narratives, and had come back to Paris to build a monument to visibility. And the monument was going to be constructed on the architecture of exactly the thing she was trying to correct. She thought about the names she'd talked about with Harriet Bloom, the names she'd planned to sew into garments. The workers. The invisible ones. The people whose labor built other people's wealth, and whose names never appeared on the walls of the institutions that benefited from them. She thought about a man in a studio in Paris in 1987, working out the mathematics of how fabric negotiates with a body, arriving at something new and precise and entirely his own. Writing it down in blue ink on paper that was now sitting scanned on a lawyer's laptop in a room with the blinds closed. "Evelyn?" Marcus's voice, careful. "What do you want to do?" She looked at her hands in her lap, her mother's hands. She'd always had her mother's hands, long-fingered, the knuckle of the right index finger slightly enlarged from years of holding a stylus. She had hated that resemblance as a teenager, had grown into accepting it, had somewhere in the last year started to think of it as neutral. Now it felt like something else. "I need to see her," she said. "I would advise—" "I'm not asking for advice." Her voice came out harder than she intended, and she didn't soften it. "I need to see my mother, tonight." Marcus looked at her for a moment, then he nodded and reached for his phone. The Valmont studio was 40 minutes away, and Evelyn spent the ride watching the city move past the car window without seeing any of it. Paris at night arranged itself in amber and shadow, and she had loved this city her whole life, had loved the specific quality of its light and the way it managed to be simultaneously monumental and human. And tonight she could not feel any of it. The city was just backdrop. The car was just motion. Everything peripheral had collapsed. What remained was one question, turning over and over in her chest like something that had lost its footing. Did you know it wasn't yours? That was the question. The only one. Not the legal architecture, not the exposure risk, not what it meant for Valmont or the Invisible Line or the Bloom Foundation partnership or any of the things that had seemed so critical 48 hours ago when she was standing in a Chicago ballroom in an ivory gown watching a room rearrange itself around her. Just that. Did you know? Because there were two versions of the story, and they led to entirely different people. In one version, a young designer had encountered an idea. In conversation, in passing, in the osmotic way that ideas move through creative communities, and had internalized it without full consciousness of the origin, had built on it in good faith, had perhaps only understood the truth later when understanding it came with unbearable cost. That version of the story contained tragedy, weakness, the specific cowardice of not being able to correct a mistake once it had become load-bearing. In the other version, she had known exactly what she was taking and had taken it anyway. Evelyn did not know which version was true. She was about to find out. The car stopped outside the studio building. She got out without waiting for Marcus to follow. He stayed in the car, understanding correctly that this was not a conversation for lawyers, and went to the entrance and used her key code and took the elevator to the 4th floor where the main studio was. The light was on. Of course the light was on. Serafina Vale worked at night the way other people slept, compulsively, as if the absence of daylight removed some inhibiting layer and let the real work happen. The studio would be warm, would smell of fabric and the particular cedar of her mother's preferred pencils, would have the low specific disorder of a creative space that was organized according to a logic only one person fully understood. Evelyn stood outside the studio door for 3 seconds. Then she pushed it open. Her mother was at the center table, bent over a technical sketch, glasses pushed up into the silver-streaked hair she kept pinned back while working. She was wearing a dark workroom apron over her clothes, the kind she'd worn for as long as Evelyn could remember. She looked up when the door opened, and her face did what it always did when she saw Evelyn. A particular opening, a brightness. The face of a woman who was not always able to show what she felt, but had one person in the world for whom the showing happened automatically. Then she saw Evelyn's expression, and went very still. "You're early," Serafina said. Her voice was even, but the pencil in her hand stopped moving. "Olivier Corot," Evelyn said. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Serafina did not flinch, did not look away. She set the pencil down on the table with a care that was too deliberate to be casual, and removed her glasses from her hair and placed them beside the pencil, and straightened to her full height, which was 2 inches shorter than Evelyn's, and looked at her daughter. "How much do you know?" she asked. And in those 4 words, calm, immediate, not protesting, not deflecting, Evelyn had her answer. She knew, had always known. The floor did not move. The walls stayed where they were. But something happened to the architecture of the room that wasn't physical. The way a space changes when a weight you've been holding unconsciously is finally named and set down, and you understand it was there all along. "Everything," Evelyn said. "Marcus found everything." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Marcus Hale." "Yes." "I wondered." A pause. "I hired him originally." "I know, and then I asked him to work for me." Serafina looked at her daughter with an expression that Evelyn could not fully read. Not anger, not guilt, exactly. Not the live, hot kind. Something older. The kind of guilt that has been carried so long it has become part of the posture. Something that had been built around, accommodated, structurally integrated until it was almost invisible. Almost. "Sit down," Serafina said. No. Her mother accepted that. Sat down herself, on the stool she used when she needed to be at table level with a flat sketch. Folded her hands in her lap. "He came to me," she said. "Olivier, in 1993. I had been using the technique for 2 years. The first collection, you know which one, had already gone. The name was established. The signature was Valmont's. She paused. He came and he told me he knew. He had documentation. He wanted acknowledgement, credit, his name attached, not compensation. He wasn't asking for money. He wanted... She stopped. Started again. He wanted to be seen. Evelyn stood completely still. I was 29 years old, her mother said. I had fought for 8 years to build something that anyone would look at, and someone was standing in front of me telling me that the center of it, the thing that made it real, was not entirely mine. Not entirely, Evelyn said, or at all. Her mother's jaw tightened. It is more complex than... Is it? Evelyn's voice was quiet and absolute. Is it more complex than a man who created something coming to you and asking you to acknowledge it, and you buying his archive instead? The studio was silent, except for the ambient sounds of a building at night, the low electrical hum, the distant sound of a vehicle on the street below. He accepted the offer, Serafina said. He had no money, no house, no options, and you had all three. Evelyn looked at her mother, the woman she had crossed an ocean for, twice this week, the woman whose handwriting she carried in an ivory clutch, the woman who had built a thing Evelyn had been proud of her whole life and had now just watched disassemble itself in a fourth-floor studio at 11 at night. Did you think he'd just disappear? He did disappear. The words came out with a crack in them. Not cruelty, grief. He took the money and he went quiet, and 4 years later he was sick, and by the time he died there was no one left to... To what? Evelyn said. To make it complicated? To make you account for it? Her mother said nothing. I was going to build the invisible line here, Evelyn said, under the Valmont name. A collection about workers who were never credited for what they built, whose names were erased from things they made. She let that sit. You understand what that means? What I would have been building and where and whose money it would have been using. Serafina Vale closed her eyes. The expression that crossed her face was the most naked thing Evelyn had ever seen on her. Stripped of the composure, the practiced grace, all the architectural elements of a woman who had built herself carefully over 50 years, what was left underneath was very small and very old, and still carrying something it had never put down. I know, her mother said. I have always known. The admission fell into the room and stayed there. And Evelyn, standing in her coat in her mother's studio at 11 at night in Paris with 8 hours of flight and no sleep behind her, and the entire project she'd given the last 8 months of her life to suddenly standing on ground she could not certify, felt something move through her that was not clean and was not simple, and had no name she could use without lying. The invisible line could not be built on this. Not without first tearing the foundation open. And tearing the foundation open would expose her mother to something that had no legal teeth but would consume everything. The name, the house, the 30 years of work that existed after the wrong, the collections that had nothing to do with the original theft, the atelier full of people whose livelihoods lived inside the Valmont name. She could not build the monument. She could not ignore what she knew. And she could not go back to not knowing it. She was standing inside the exact trap she had spent 7 months studying from the outside. The place where doing the right thing and protecting the people you loved were not the same direction, and someone was going to pay the cost regardless of which way you moved. I need you to tell me one thing, Evelyn said. Her voice came out steady. She didn't know how. Her mother opened her eyes. Is there anyone left? Evelyn said. Family, collaborators, anyone who was close to him and is still alive. Serafina was quiet for a moment. Then, there was a student. He mentored her in the late 80s. She left fashion. I don't know what... Her name. Her mother hesitated for exactly 1 second, then said it. Evelyn took out her phone, wrote the name down. Then she looked at her mother, the woman she loved most in the world, the woman who had just become a stranger, the woman who was both of those things simultaneously and would be both for as long as either of them lived, and said the only true thing she had left. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I need you to understand that I'm going to do something, and it may cost us everything, both of us, all of this. She gestured, at the studio, at the sketches, at the 30 years of fabric and light and built reputation surrounding them. If you have something to say before I start, say it now. Her mother looked at her for a long time. Then Serafina Vale, who had never, in 52 years of public life, in 100 interviews, in 4 documentaries, in 30 years of being watched and photographed and analyzed, said the one thing she had never said in any of those forums. I'm sorry. Not to Evelyn. To the room. To the absent man whose name was written in blue ink on paper in a lawyer's laptop. To the things she had done when she was 29 and frightened and had never, in all the years since, found the courage to undo. Evelyn stood there and let it be said. Then she walked to the studio door and opened it, and the hallway outside was empty and bright and entirely indifferent to everything that had just happened inside. And she walked into it and kept walking and did not look back at the woman sitting on the stool in the workroom apron, alone in the amber light of the place she had built on someone else's. She walked for 2 hours, not toward anything, not away exactly, just through. The streets of Paris at midnight doing what they always did, existing in that specific mode of a city that never fully sleeps but changes character after dark, the tourist architecture giving way to the working city underneath, the delivery trucks and the cleaning crews and the solitary figures moving through pools of amber streetlight with the particular purposeful isolation of people who have somewhere to be at an hour when most people don't. Evelyn walked through all of it and felt none of it. What she felt was the specific nausea of a structure collapsing in slow motion, not the sudden drop, the groan and tilt, the moment when the load-bearing element fails and the thing doesn't fall immediately but begins its irreversible angle downward, and every second between that moment and the impact is its own particular kind of unbearable. Her phone had buzzed 4 times. Marcus, twice. An unknown Paris number, once. And then her mother, once. A single call that rang and stopped and left no message. She didn't call back. She walked until her feet told her she'd been walking in dress shoes she hadn't changed out of since the flight. And then she stopped on a bridge over the Seine and leaned on the stone railing and looked at the water below. The river was black and moving and indifferent. She'd always liked that about rivers. The indifference wasn't hostile, it was just older than anything she was carrying, the name her mother had given her. She pulled out her phone and looked at it, written in the Notes app in her own handwriting. Adele Voss, a woman who had apprenticed under Olivier Corot in the late 80s, who had left fashion, whose current life and location were entirely unknown to Evelyn and apparently had been only hazily known to her mother. She typed the name into a search. The results were thin, which was its own kind of information. A mention in a 1991 French fashion journal, a group exhibition of emerging designers, Adele Voss listed among 6 names with a single sentence about her work. A passing reference in an essay about independent French ateliers from 2005, which mentioned Corot's influence and named her as one of 3 students. Nothing after that. No social presence, no professional footprint, the kind of digital absence that either meant a very private person or someone who had deliberately stepped back from the searchable world. Evelyn understood that impulse intimately. She called Marcus. He answered immediately. Where are you? A bridge. I'm fine. She didn't elaborate. I need you to find someone. Adele Voss. She was a student of Corot's in the late 80s. She left fashion sometime in the early 90s. I need a current address. A pause. By when? Morning. Another pause. Evelyn, I know, she said. I know what I'm doing. She didn't know what she was doing, but she said it anyway. What happened with your mother? Marcus asked carefully. She confirmed it, all of it, she knew. Evelyn said it factually, the way you say a temperature or a distance. Not because it didn't hurt, because if she let it have its actual weight right now, she would not be able to carry the next 12 hours. Find Voss, please. She hung up. Stood on the bridge for another 10 minutes, watching the water. Then she went to find a cab and a hotel and 4 hours of sleep, in that order, because falling apart was a luxury she had not yet earned. Marcus called at 6:47 a.m. Adele Voss, 61 years old, she lives in Lyon. She runs a small textile workshop, custom fabric production for independent designers. Very small operation, off the main industry radar. A pause. She is Olivier Corot's niece. The information landed like a second step on a staircase you thought had ended. His niece, Evelyn said. His sister's daughter. The sister died in 2001. Adele appears to have been his closest living relative at the time of his death. Marcus's voice had taken on the very particular quality it acquired when he was delivering something he'd processed already, and needed her to process now. If she had pursued a claim in 2003, she would have had standing. Potentially significant standing. His archive, his documented technique, his documented consultation with a Paris IP firm in 1994. A beat. The statute of limitations is gone, but standing in a public sense, a moral claim, a reputational claim, that doesn't expire. Evelyn was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed in yesterday's clothes. The room was small and clean and utterly neutral, the kind of room that deliberately refuses to have a personality. Does she know? Evelyn asked. About any of it? I don't know. I only found her 2 hours ago. Okay. Evelyn stood. Send me the address in Lyon. You're going today? Yes. Evelyn. His voice shifted, lost its professional register for just a moment. You understand what you're doing. You go to this woman, you tell her what you found. There is no controlled version of what happens after that. She could go to the press. She could go public with the archive documentation. Regardless of the legal limitations, the narrative, I know what the narrative does, Evelyn said. Send me the address. He did. Well, the TGV to Lyon took 2 hours. She sat in a window seat and watched France unroll outside the glass. The flat geometry of the countryside, the scattered industrial outskirts of smaller cities, the particular gray-green of late autumn fields that have given up their color but haven't yet gone fully skeletal. She drank bad coffee from a paper cup and thought about Harriet Bloom. Harriet, who was in Chicago waiting for a decision about the invisible line. Harriet, who had spent 2 years trying to find the right vehicle for something she believed in, who had looked at Evelyn across a gala table and seen, correctly, a woman who could give the project actual weight. Harriet didn't know any of this yet. She was still operating on the version of the story where Evelyn was Seraphina Vale's daughter, Valmont was a legitimate institution, and the invisible line was a clean shot from wound to monument. She thought about Celeste Arden on the edge of a bare mattress in Chicago, with her small gold earrings and her uncomfortable honesty, about the week of labor she'd agreed to, about the private account she was supposed to write. She thought about Mrs. Delacroix and her window boxes and her back that would not straighten. She thought about a man in a studio in Paris in 1987, working in blue ink, discovering something real. The train moved south. Where? Adele Voss's workshop was in a converted ground floor space in the Croix-Rousse district, the old silk workers' neighborhood, which struck Evelyn as the kind of geographic detail that would feel meaningful in a film and in real life was probably coincidence. The building was limestone and age-marked, the workshop entrance marked only by a small metal sign with the business name in plain type. Evelyn stood outside for a moment. She had not called ahead, had decided deliberately not to. A phone call gave warning. Warning gave time to prepare, and preparation in this context meant rehearsed responses and managed distance, and she needed neither. She pushed the door open. The workshop was one long room, high-ceilinged from its previous industrial life. The natural light from north-facing windows falling across 2 large cutting tables and 3 large looms against the far wall. The smell was fiber and oil and the specific cool of a working space that is kept at a temperature for the materials rather than the people. 2 young women worked at one of the cutting tables. Neither of them was Adele. Then a door at the back of the room opened and a woman came through, carrying a bolt of dark gray fabric balanced against her right shoulder, and Evelyn recognized her the way you sometimes recognize someone you've never met, by the quality of their presence, the way they occupied space. Adele Voss was 61 and had the compact, self-contained physicality of someone who had worked with her hands for decades, and her face carried the marks of that, not aged so much as resolved. The features settled into their final arrangement, the eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses direct and already reading Evelyn before she'd said a word. She set the bolt down on the second cutting table, straightened. "Can I help you?" Her French was lion-accented, warm consonants. Evelyn answered in French, which was one of 4 languages she'd grown up between. "My name is Evelyn Vale. I need to speak with you about your uncle." Adele went very still. Not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of someone who has been waiting at some low frequency for a long time and has just heard a sound they recognize. She looked at Evelyn for 5 full seconds, then said, in French, "Send them out." She was looking at her two employees. They read the room with the fast competence of people who worked in close quarters with someone long enough to know their registers, and gathered their things and left without being told twice. The workshop door closed. Adele Voss looked at Evelyn directly. Serafina Vale's daughter. Yes. I wondered if she had children. A pause. I never looked. I have documentation, Evelyn said, of your uncle's work. The archive, the IP consultation in 1994, the acquisition by my mother's holding company. She said it flat and complete. No escalation, no emphasis, just the facts in sequence. I came here to tell you directly before I decide what to do with it. Adele's face had not changed. She walked to a stool beside the cutting table and sat on it, the movement unhurried, and folded her arms. Before you decide. Yes, not before you ask my permission. Before you decide. The distinction was deliberate. Evelyn acknowledged it. I can't ask your permission for a decision that involves my family, but you deserve to know what I found and what I'm considering before it happens. Adele looked at her for a long moment. The light from the north windows was even and cool and showed everything. The lines of her face, the careful set of her jaw, the way her eyes were doing something complicated that hadn't resolved yet into any single emotion. My uncle told me, she said, in 1994, after he came back from Paris. Evelyn went still. He told me he had met with Serafina Vale, that he said she offered him a sum for the archive and he took it. Adele's voice was entirely level, professionally level, the voice of someone who has had 29 years to decide how to hold this. He said he had been going to fight, and then he sat across from a woman who needed it more than he did, or a brief compression of her mouth. That is what he said. I did not believe that was the whole truth. I believe he was also afraid. Of the cost? Of the years? He was not in good health even then. She stopped, started differently. He was tired. The word landed with its full weight, tired. The exhaustion of a man who created something real and watched it become someone else's signature and had to decide whether the fight was worth what was left of him. He made me promise not to pursue it after he died, Adele said. He said it would be a war without a winnable end, and he didn't want to give his last years or his name to a war. She looked at the bolt of gray fabric she'd set on the table, something specific in the look. I kept that promise. For 22 years I kept it. And now, Evelyn asked. Now, a woman I've never met is standing in my workshop telling me that the daughter of the woman who took my uncle's work has found the documentation and is here before doing anything with it. Adele looked back at her, the direct reading look. Why? What do you want? I'm building something, Evelyn said. A collection, a show, about workers who were never credited, whose names were erased from what they built. She watched Adele's face as the shape of the irony registered. I know. You know, Adele said, not unkindly, I didn't know about my mother, about any of this, until 2 days ago. The project came from a real place. It still comes from a real place. Evelyn's voice was steady, but the effort of keeping it that way was physical. She could feel it in her throat, in the controlled pace of her breathing. But I won't build it on a dishonest foundation, and the Valmont name is compromised, Adele said simply. Yes. Adele stood from the stool, walked to the window. The north light fell across her profile, the specific clean line of someone who had their own kind of resolve, earned differently, but no less real. What are you asking me? Adele said. I'm asking you if you want your uncle's name attached to what I'm building, not as a footnote, as a foundation. The collection credited, publicly, verifiably, to the structural technique he developed, his name on every program, every press release, every garment tag, not Valmont's. His. Adele turned from the window. Her face had shifted. Something had moved in it, something that had been braced for a long time and was now, cautiously, releasing. And your mother, she said, Serafina Vale. That is a separate problem, Evelyn said, and it's mine. You would expose her. I would correct the record. What that exposes is her responsibility to answer for. She held Adele's gaze. I can't promise it won't damage Valmont. I think it will. I can't promise it won't be difficult for everyone connected to it. I think it will be. I can only tell you that I will not build a monument to visibility on a buried truth. The workshop was quiet. The looms in the back stood inert. The bolts of fabric along the walls held their colors in the flat northern light. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck reversed with a mechanical beep, regular and indifferent. Adele Voss looked at her for a long time. Then she walked to the back of the workshop and disappeared through the door she'd come from. Evelyn stood and waited, not knowing if she was coming back, not knowing if she'd miscalculated, not knowing anything except that she had committed to the direction, and the direction was forward, and there was no version of herself that could walk back through the workshop entrance and onto the Lyon streets having said less than she'd said. Adele came back carrying a wooden box, not large, the size of a document case. She set it on the cutting table and opened it. Inside, laid flat, were papers, sketches, fabric swatches pinned to handwritten notes. The handwriting was the same blue ink Evelyn had seen on Marcus's scanned documents, the same hand, the same specificity. He gave me copies before he sold the archive, Adele said. He said he needed someone to have them, not to use, just... She touched the edge of one of the papers. To hold. Evelyn looked at the papers, at the drawings, the structural draping diagrams, the annotated construction notes, the dates running from 1985 through 1993. At the specific visual language that she had grown up calling Valmont, that she had described to interviewers since she was 17 as her mother's genius, that was in fact the meticulous and original work of a man she had never met who had spent his last decade in diminishing health in a city that had forgotten him. She felt something move through her that was not clean. Grief, rage, the specific shame of inheritance, not guilt for a wrong she committed, but the responsibility of someone who has benefited from it and must now decide what to do with that fact. I need these, she said, for the attribution, for the record. I know. Adele's hand rested on the box lid. He would have wanted to be seen. She said it with the directness of certainty. That was all he asked your mother for in 1993. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for the work back. He asked for his name on it. She looked at Evelyn. She offered him money instead, because an acknowledgement could be traced. Money could be managed. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, opened them. I'll make sure his name is on it, she said. I give you my word. Adele looked at her steadily. Your word, she said. You understand that means nothing yet. It only means something after. Yes, Evelyn said. I know. Adele closed the box and slid it across the cutting table toward her. Evelyn picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, the way things always are when they've been held in one place for a long time. She was almost at the door when Adele spoke again. She was afraid of him, Adele said. Evelyn stopped. Your mother. Not of Olivier personally, of what he represented, the things she couldn't originate. She could build anything, could execute anything, could run a house with the discipline of someone twice her age, but she could not invent the technique. She found it, and she was afraid that without it she was ordinary. Evelyn stood with her hand on the door frame. That is not your burden, Adele said, but it is part of the truth. I thought you should have all of it. Evelyn said nothing, walked out into the Lyon afternoon with a wooden box and a decision that had already been made, and a phone that was about to ring from a number she was no longer sure she could answer. It rang 40 minutes later on the platform at Part Dieu station. Her mother. Evelyn looked at the name on the screen. The train to Paris was boarding behind her. The platform was full. Commuters, families, the indifferent machinery of a transit system that moved people through their lives without commentary. She picked up. Where are you? Her mother's voice. Still even. But something underneath it that Evelyn had heard only twice before in her life. A structural sound. The sound of a controlled thing working very hard at its control. Lion, I'm coming back to Paris tonight. Marcus told me you went to find Adele Voss. Yes. A pause. And? She had copies of the original documentation. I have them. The pause that followed was longer. Evelyn could hear her mother breathing, could picture her, in the studio probably, or the upstairs office. Standing. Serafina Vale did not sit down for difficult conversations. Evelyn. Her name again in that specific voice. Not a plea, not a command. the voice of a woman who had run out of the versions of this moment she'd prepared for. I need you to understand what you're holding. I understand exactly what I'm holding. If this goes public, I know what happens. 340 people work for Valmont, not family, not us, people with children and mortgages and careers built inside this house. If the foundation narrative is, don't, Evelyn's voice came out hard. Don't use them. That's not a fair argument, and you know it. Silence. I'm not your enemy, Evelyn said. The words cost her. But I'm not your solution either. I can't make this disappear. I won't. What are you going to do? Her mother's voice. Stripped now of everything except the question itself. Evelyn picked up the wooden box and walked toward the train. I'm going to correct the record, she said. I'm going to give him his name back. And then I'm going to figure out what, if anything, can be built honestly from what's left. The show? I don't know yet. She stepped onto the train, found her car, sat. The doors closed behind her. I'll be in Paris by 9. We need to have a conversation that is not on the phone. Yes, her mother said, very quietly. Evelyn hung up, set the wooden box on the seat beside her, pressed her back against the seat, and closed her eyes and breathed. In, out, the mechanical rhythm of the train finding its speed beneath her. She had the documentation. She had Adele Voss's implicit support. She had a project that could not proceed under its current architecture. And she had a mother she still loved, which was the most complicated variable of all because love did not simplify the math. Love made the math harder. Love was the thing that made you want the lesser version of the truth, the more comfortable version, the version where the damage was contained and the person you loved got to stay the person you needed them to be. She did not want the lesser version. That was the thing she'd confirmed in Lyon, standing in a workshop with a wooden box in her hands. She had come to Chicago 8 months ago to find out who she was when the infrastructure was gone. She had found out. And the person she was, stripped down to bare function, was someone who could not build a monument on a buried name. Not even for her mother. Not even for love. The train accelerated south of Lyon, and the flat autumn fields opened up on both sides. And the light was going orange and long, and Evelyn sat with her eyes closed and the box on the seat beside her and felt the full specific weight of what she was carrying, and did not put it down, and did not reach for something easier. Her phone buzzed. A message from Harriet Bloom. Board meeting moved up. They want an answer on the Invisible Line partnership by Friday. I need to know if we're proceeding. What do you want to do? Friday was tomorrow. Evelyn opened her eyes, looked at the message for a long moment, then typed, I need 1 hour with you before the meeting. There's something you need to know about the project before you put your name on it. Harriet's response came back in under a minute. That doesn't sound good. It isn't, Evelyn typed. But it's true. That has to count for something. She put the phone away. Outside the window, the last of the afternoon light was burning down across the French countryside. Orange deepening toward red, the specific color of a sky that is not yet dark, but has committed to the direction. The fields ran flat to the horizon, and the shadows were getting long, and the train was moving fast. And somewhere ahead of her, in a city she'd been born in and left and returned to, a room full of people were about to learn something that could not be unlearned. And a name that had been buried for 30 years was about to be. The train pulled into Paris Gare de Lyon at 9:14. Evelyn was the last one off her car. Not deliberately. She just sat for an extra minute after the train stopped, with the wooden box in her lap and her hands flat on top of it, listening to the sound of the platform outside. The voices, the announcements, the specific percussion of a major station at night, and letting herself be still inside all of it for 60 seconds before she stood up and walked into what came next. She had been making decisions for 72 hours without stopping. She allowed herself 60 seconds to not decide anything. Then she picked up the box and walked off the train. Marcus was waiting on the platform. He had the look of a man who had been in motion all day and was still in motion even while standing still. The particular kinetic quality of someone managing multiple urgent things simultaneously and doing it on not enough sleep. He fell into step beside her without preamble. Harriet Bloom lands at Charles de Gaulle at 11, he said. She moved her schedule. I know, I asked her to. The board meeting is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I've been in contact with 2 of the members. They don't know the specifics yet. I've kept it general. but they know something has changed and they're not comfortable. Good, Evelyn said. They shouldn't be comfortable. Comfort is what kept this buried for 30 years. Marcus glanced at this box under her arm, said nothing about it. Your mother called me, he said instead. What did she say? She asked me to advise her on exposure mitigation. He said it carefully, without inflection. I told her I couldn't, that my obligation in this situation is to the process, not to an outcome, and that she should retain separate counsel. Evelyn looked at him sidelong. Thank you. I want you to know, he said, and his voice shifted into something less professional, that what you're about to do tomorrow, what you're already doing, is one of the harder things I've watched someone choose. And I've watched a lot of choices in this business. Most of them go the other way. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. They were moving through the main hall of the station now, the vault of it overhead, the night crowds partying around them. My mother built something real, she said finally. After 1994, after the acquisition, the house she built is genuinely hers. The work is genuinely hers. None of what I'm doing takes that away from her. She paused. But the foundation is wrong, and you cannot build a monument to the truth on a foundation that's a lie. You just can't. The whole thing becomes the lie. I know, Marcus said. I need a room for tonight, and a car to the hotel at 10:30. Done. He walked her to the car, held the door. She got in and the door closed and the city moved past the windows, and she sat with the box and the weight of tomorrow and did not sleep, which she had already expected, and made her peace with that. Harriet Bloom arrived at the hotel at 11:50. She came through the lobby still in her travel coat, a small hard-sided carry-on behind her, and found Evelyn at a corner table in the hotel bar, the only guests at this hour, the bartender polishing glasses at the far end with the discretion of someone paid to be professionally inattentive. Harriet sat down, looked at Evelyn's face, then at the wooden box on the table between them. How bad? She said. It depends on what you're protecting, Evelyn said. Harriet took off her coat, settled. Tell me, Evelyn told her. All of it. The Corot archive, the holding company, the IP consultation, the acquisition, Adele Voss in her Lyon workshop, the box, her mother's admission in the studio. She told it in sequence, without emphasis or editorializing, the way you tell a story when you need the other person to understand the shape of it before they react to any part. She spoke for 18 minutes without interruption. Harriet listened with her hands folded on the table, and her face in that state of complete attention that Evelyn had first noticed at the gala, and understood now to be the woman's primary mode when something mattered. When Evelyn finished, Harriet was quiet for a moment. The show can't be called The Invisible Line, she said. Not under the Valmont umbrella. No. The Bloom Foundation can't attach to Valmont, not until this is public and the attribution is corrected. She said it clean, no hesitation. That's not about protecting the foundation's reputation. It's about what the foundation is for. I know. So the question is what you want to build instead. Harriet looked at her steadily. Because the project itself, the workers, the names, the front row, that has nothing to do with Valmont. That belongs to you. And it can exist without the Valmont name. It just needs a different foundation. A different foundation, Evelyn said. That's exactly what it needs. Harriet leaned forward slightly. What are you thinking? The show happens in Paris as planned, but the collection is not presented as Valmont. It's presented as independent, under my name, not my mother's. And the attribution of the structural technique is corrected publicly in the program notes. Olivier Corot's name. His dates, the history. Clear, documented, without apology. The press will go after Serafina. Yes. Valmont may not survive the narrative. I know. Harriet studied her. You've made peace with that. I haven't made peace with anything, Evelyn said, and her voice had the rough edge of honesty in it. I'm sitting with it. There's a difference. Making peace implies something settled, and this is not settled and may never be settled. But I've decided, and the decision is the correction. Harriet was quiet for another moment. Your mother, she said, not a question, just an acknowledgement of the weight. My mother is responsible for her own choices. I'm responsible for mine. She'll see this as the betrayal. She may, Evelyn looked at the wooden box. I see it as the only way to respect what she taught me about work. She always said that the integrity of a garment is in its structure, what's underneath, what nobody sees but everything depends on. She paused. I'm applying the lesson. Something moved across Harriet Bloom's face, not sentimentality, nothing soft, but a recognition that had substance to it. The look of a person seeing something align. I'm in, Harriet said. The foundation backs the show, under your name, independent of Valmont. Full support. She reached across the table and put her hand briefly on the wooden box. And we find a way to make sure his name is said in every room this show enters. Evelyn nodded once. They stayed for another hour, working through the structure of it. Not the details. Those could wait for morning, but the bones. What the show would be. What it would say. What it owed, and to whom. By the time Harriet went up to her room, it was past 1 a.m, and Evelyn had the beginning of something that was smaller than what she'd planned 2 weeks ago, and harder than anything she'd expected, and more genuinely hers than any version that came before it. She sat alone for a while after Harriet left. Then she called her mother. Serafina answered on the second ring. I've made a decision, Evelyn said. I want to tell you directly before tomorrow, so you can prepare. Silence on the other end. The show goes forward under my name. The Valmont name is not attached. In the program notes and all public materials, the structural draping technique is attributed to Olivier Carreau, with documentation. His dates, his work, his name. She kept her voice even, not cold even. The press will cover it. The industry will cover it. It will be attached to your name regardless of whether your name is on the show, because the connection will be made by everyone who covers it. Her mother said nothing for a long moment. Then, you're dismantling me. I'm correcting the record. There is no correction without destruction. 30 years of... Evelyn, the people who work in this building, I know. Do you? Because I know. Her voice was harder now, not from anger, but from the effort of holding her own position against the pull of her mother's pain, which was real, and her mother's fear, which was real, and her mother's love for the house she'd built, which was also real, and none of which changed the shape of the thing that needed to be done. I have thought about nothing else for 3 days. I know what this costs. I know who it costs. I am not doing it carelessly. Her mother was quiet again. What do you want from me? Serafina asked. The words came out stripped, genuinely asking. I want you to make a statement, Evelyn said. Before the show. Voluntary, in your own voice. Acknowledging Carreau's contribution. Taking responsibility for how the archive was acquired. Not for the lawyers. Not managed communication. Your actual voice. The silence that followed was the longest yet. If I do that, her mother said slowly, the legal exposure. You said the statute of limitations is gone. Marcus confirmed there's no legal claimant withstanding. The only exposure is reputational. Evelyn paused. And you've been carrying the reputational weight internally for 30 years. Externally, it only lasts as long as you refuse to name it. A voluntary acknowledgement changes the shape of it. It doesn't erase it, but it changes it. She heard her mother breathe. A long, slow breath. The kind that is not about oxygen. You learned that somewhere, Serafina said. From a woman in Chicago, Evelyn said, who sat in my apartment on a bare mattress and told the truth when nobody required her to. And it changed something. Not immediately, not cleanly, but genuinely. Another silence. I need time, her mother said. You have until 9 a.m. The board meets at 10. Whatever you decide, they're going to learn everything in that room. The only choice is whether your statement precedes them or follows the exposure. She heard something on the other end of the line that might have been a small sound, or might have been silence doing something different. I'll call you at 8, her mother said. Okay. Evelyn, she waited. I know I don't have the right to ask this, her mother said, but I need to ask it anyway. Will you be there? In the meeting, not to advocate for me, just... Her voice fractured slightly, and then recovered, and the recovery cost something visible even through a phone line. I don't want to do it alone. Evelyn closed her eyes, felt the weight of the question, the specific and merciless weight of being loved by someone who had done wrong and loving them back, and neither of those things canceling the other out. Yes, she said. I'll be there. She hung up, sat for a long time in the empty hotel bar with the wooden box and the sound of the city outside doing its indifferent late-night things, and allowed herself to feel the full cost of the choice she'd made. Not the public cost, the private one. The cost that doesn't have a press release and doesn't resolve into a statement and doesn't get corrected by attribution in a program note. The cost of being the person who makes the right call on the wrong side of love. She stayed with it until it was part of her. Then she went upstairs and slept for 5 hours, which was not enough, and was everything available. Kotsak. Her mother called at 7:53. I'll make the statement, Serafina said, voice clear, something in it that was different from last night. Not easier. More decided. The voice of someone who has moved through the territory of a decision and come out on the other side, not at peace, but committed. I want to write it myself. I don't want Marcus or a communications person. My words. Okay. I'll need to speak with Adele Voss. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. I think she'll see you. Will you arrange it? After the board meeting. Yes, after. A pause. I want to apologize to her directly. Before any public statement, she deserves that first. Evelyn looked out the hotel window at Paris in the early morning. The specific gray gold of it, the sky not yet decided between cloud and clear. Yes, she said. She does. I'm sorry, Evelyn. The words came out without architecture, just themselves. Not for being exposed, for the thing that required exposing. Evelyn held the phone, thought about what to say. I know, she said finally. I know you are. Is that enough? Not yet, she said honestly. But it's the beginning of something that might be, over time, if the choices that follow it are different. She paused. That's the best I can give you right now. Her mother accepted that. I'll be at the office at 9:30. The board meeting was at 10. 8 people in the glass conference room with the view of the Seine. Evelyn knew 3 of them, had met them at events over the years, had grown up adjacent to the machinery they represented. The other 5 she knew by name and function. The room had the climate-controlled, acoustically careful quality of spaces built for decisions that have real consequences. Serafina stood at the head of the table. Evelyn sat along the wall, not at the table itself. She had made that choice deliberately. This was her mother's room, her mother's house, her mother's reckoning. Evelyn was there as a witness and as a promise kept, not as a participant. Serafina spoke for 22 minutes. She did not use notes. She had the document, her own statement, written by hand on Valmont letterhead at her desk at 7 in the morning. But she didn't read from it. She spoke from the same place people speak from when they have processed something far enough that the processing is in the voice itself. She told them about Olivier Corot, about 1993, about the technique and the archive and the acquisition. She told them what she had done and why, insofar as why was something she could speak to with any honesty. She told them she had been 29 years old and afraid, and that this did not excuse the choice, and that she had carried it for 3 decades, and that carrying it had not been the same as accounting for it. She told them the show would go forward under Evelyn's name, not Valmont's, that the attribution correction would be public and documented, that she was prepared to face whatever reputational consequence followed. The room was very quiet when she finished. One of the board members, a woman named Claire Fontaine, who had been with Valmont for 19 years, had her hands pressed flat on the table in front of her and was looking at them rather than at Serafina, and the line of her shoulders said something about the effort of processing a truth that required rearranging a large portion of what she'd believed. Another member, the one Evelyn knew least, asked one question. Is there legal exposure? No, Serafina said. Then he stopped, looked around the table, did not finish the sentence. Then the question, Claire Fontaine said, without looking up from her hands, is whether the house continues to exist with integrity after this. Not legally, actually. She looked up at Serafina. That depends on you, on what you do after this room. I know, Serafina said. It also depends, Claire said, and she looked briefly at Evelyn along the wall, on whether the correction is real, not managed, real. Evelyn held her gaze. It's real. Claire looked at her for a moment, then nodded once, the nod of someone filing something in the column of things to watch and verify over time. The meeting ended 40 minutes later without resolution, which was correct. Resolution was not the work of a single morning. Resolution was the accumulation of subsequent choices, and those would take months, and some of them would be wrong, and all of them would cost something. That was the actual shape of it. Evelyn and her mother walked out into the corridor side by side. They stood there for a moment in the way people stand when the event has ended and the aftermath is beginning, and neither is sure which direction the aftermath goes from here. "I'll call Adele Voss," Evelyn said, "this afternoon." Her mother nodded. "The show is in 6 weeks," Evelyn said. "I need access to the atelier's production capacity. Under lease, not Valmont involvement, independent transaction. I'll instruct the production team. And I need the names. The workers we're building the collection around. I have 16 so far. I need 12 more. I'm going to Lyon next week to speak to people Adele knows. But if you have contacts..." She stopped. Her mother was looking at her with an expression that had no category. Not pride, because pride would be wrong in the circumstances, would be claiming something that hadn't been earned in this context. Not simply grief, something that occupied the space between them. A mother looking at a daughter who had grown while she wasn't watching, or while she was watching but seeing something else, into a person who would do the thing she herself had not done, the harder, more expensive thing, and who had done it without destroying her entirely in the process. "I have contacts," Serafina said. "Good." They stood in the corridor a moment longer. Then Evelyn did something she hadn't planned. She reached out and put her hand on her mother's arm. Not an embrace, not forgiveness converted into physical form, just contact. The specific human acknowledgement that another person is present and real and standing in a hard place. Her mother put her hand over Evelyn's, held it for 3 seconds. Then they both let go. 6 weeks later. The converted cathedral beside the Seine had been chosen by Harriet Bloom, and Evelyn had seen it once, briefly, in a site visit, and understood immediately why Harriet had chosen it. It had the quality of a space that had been built for something serious, and remained, by its architecture, serious regardless of what happened inside it. The stone walls did not reduce anything. The light from the high windows fell honestly across whatever it landed on. The front row was filled by the time Evelyn went backstage. She had insisted on handling the invitations for the front row personally. Every name selected through the network Adele Voss had connected her to, and through Harriet's contacts, and through 3 weeks of conversations with labor organizations across France. The women and men who sat in those seats, housekeepers, caregivers, janitors, seamstresses who had spent decades in production rooms that sent garments to runways they would never see, had been given no explanation beyond an invitation that said their presence was the purpose of the event, not the background. Adele Voss sat in the front row, seat 7, center. She was wearing the gray fabric Evelyn had seen on the cutting table in her Lyon workshop, a jacket she had made herself, simple and precise and entirely sufficient. She had her hands in her lap and she was looking at the empty runway with an expression Evelyn had watched develop over 6 weeks of conversation and collaboration. Not softness, because Adele Voss did not have softness as a primary mode, but an openness, a willingness to be present for something that was, belatedly and imperfectly, attempting to do right by the man she'd kept faith with for 22 years. Evelyn watched her through the gap in the backstage curtain for a moment. Then she turned to the 12 models waiting in the staging area, each one wearing a garment from the collection. Each garment tagged, not on the outside where it would be a performance. Inside, sewn into the lining, real names, real workers, identified with the same care that goes into the structural construction of the piece itself. Because the name was part of the structure, because without the name the garment was, as Olivier Corot had written in blue ink in 1987, incomplete. The program that had been placed on every seat in the house contained a foreword. 2 pages, in Evelyn's handwriting, printed exactly as she'd written it by hand. It named Olivier Corot. His dates, 1947 to 2003. His contribution, described technically and specifically and completely, without vagueness. It named the technique. It named the house it had originally belonged to. It also contained, in the second-to-last paragraph, a statement from Serafina Vale. Her own words, unedited, short, not managed. Evelyn had read it once, approved it, and then not read it again because reading it again would open something she needed to keep functional today. She could hear the house filling outside. Then she heard footsteps behind her and turned. Celeste Arden was standing in the backstage corridor. She was wearing something Evelyn had never seen on her, a well-made but not extravagant dark dress, her hair simple, no visible jewelry. She looked like a woman who had been thinking hard for 6 weeks, which she had. She had completed the week of labor. Evelyn had heard this through Harriet, not from Celeste directly. A week working alongside a home health aide in Paris's eastern arrondissements. The private account she'd written was sealed in an envelope that Celeste had given to Harriet to pass to Evelyn unopened, and Evelyn had not opened it yet, by choice. Not yet. Some things needed time to become what they were going to be. Celeste looked at Evelyn. Her eyes moved briefly to the backstage area. The models, the garments, the organized quiet of something about to happen. "You actually built it," she said. "I said I would." "You also said it might cost everything." "It cost a significant amount," Evelyn said. "Not everything." The difference turned out to matter. Celeste nodded, looked at the gap in the curtain toward the front row, saw Adele. Something moved across her face. "She came. She was always going to come." Evelyn paused. She kept his work in a wooden box for 22 years. She wasn't going to miss this. They stood for a moment in the specific silence of two people who have moved through something difficult together, at a remove, and arrived at the same place by different routes. "I read what you said," Celeste said. "In the program notes. The section about your mother. Everyone will read it." "I know." Celeste looked at her directly. "That's a harder thing to have written than the attribution. The attribution was justice. That section was—" She stopped. "I don't have the word." "Neither do I," Evelyn said. "I wrote it 5 times before I stopped looking for the word and just said the thing." A small sound in the house, the shift in ambient noise that signals a crowd settling, readying. "I should go find my seat," Celeste said. She started to turn, then stopped, looked back. "The account I wrote, the private one. I haven't read it yet." "I know, I wanted to tell you." She stopped again. Evelyn was beginning to understand the specific texture of a Celeste Arden who was no longer performing certainty. The hesitations were real, the incomplete sentences genuine. "It wasn't what I expected to find out about myself. That's usually how it works." "No, I mean—" Celeste met her eyes, and the look was unguarded in a way that would have been inconceivable 6 weeks ago in a Chicago penthouse kitchen. "It was harder than I thought. The week. Not physically. Harder in a different way. Because competence doesn't transfer. I was useless at the beginning. And the woman I was working with, she was kind about it, which was worse, somehow, than if she'd been impatient. Because her kindness was entirely unconditional. She had no reason to be kind to me, and she was anyway, and I couldn't—" She pressed her lips together. "I couldn't fit it into any structure I had for how people worked." Evelyn said nothing. "I think I'd believed," Celeste said very quietly, "that kindness was a currency. That it circulated in a system where people gave it because they expected return. And this woman just spent it, without accounting, without keeping track." A pause. "I didn't know people did that." "Some people do," Evelyn said. "I know that now." Celeste straightened slightly. "I'm going to find my seat." She walked out through the curtain. Evelyn watched the curtain settle behind her. Then she turned back to the staging area and stood among the garments. The 12 pieces, each one built on the structural technique of a man who had not lived to see his name restored. Each one lined with a name that the world would begin to say tonight. She looked at them carefully, the way her mother had taught her to look at things. Not as objects, but as arguments. Each seam a position, each fold a decision, each interior construction the answer to the question of what this thing is. Actually, when everything decorative is stripped away, what it is actually is someone's work. Someone's specific, irreplaceable, painstaking work. That was the argument of the collection. That was the thing she had come back to Paris to say. The music began in the house. Low, deliberate, the kind of score that holds a room without dominating it. Evelyn took a breath, looked at the first model, A woman named Sophie, 23, wearing the opening piece, ivory linen with a neckline achieved through the Corot draping technique. The interior tagged with the name of a 70-year-old Senegalese home care worker named Fatou, who had asked only one question when Evelyn's team had contacted her. Will people actually see the name or just hear about it? They will see it, Evelyn had told her. We will show them, she nodded to Sophie. Sophie walked out through the curtain and the light caught her and the house went quiet in the specific way it goes quiet when something real is happening. Evelyn stood in the wings and listened to the silence do its work. After the show, she found her mother. Serafina was standing in a corner of the post-show space, the cathedral's side aisle, lit now by low, warm light, people moving through it in the particular stunned quiet that follows something that has succeeded at what it intended. Not celebration exactly, something more interior. Her mother was watching the room. Her face had the specific exhaustion of someone who has survived something and not yet processed whether survival was the right word for what they did. Evelyn stood beside her. They didn't speak immediately, just watched. Adele Voss in conversation with Harriet Bloom, both women serious and intent. Celeste standing with a woman Evelyn didn't recognize, listening more than talking, which was new. The front row guests moving through the space with the slightly disoriented expressions of people who had been placed at the center of something and were still calibrating what that meant. Adele, her mother said finally, just the name. She wants to meet you, Evelyn said. She agreed. Her mother exhaled, slow. Tonight? When you're ready. A pause. I don't think I'll ever be ready. No, Evelyn said, but you'll go anyway. Her mother looked at her. The expression on her face was the one from the studio corridor, unclassifiable, caught between things that didn't resolve into a single word. You know what I keep thinking about, Serafina said. What stayed with me since the board meeting? Evelyn waited. In 1993, when Olivier came to me, he didn't ask for the technique back. He knew he couldn't have that. It was already 2 years into the world, already attached to Valmont. He just wanted his name on it. That was the entire ask. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing something. And I decided that was too much to give. The room moved around them, the light held. His name, Serafina said. 3 syllables. That was the whole thing he wanted. Evelyn looked across the room to where Adele Voss stood, who had kept a wooden box for 22 years, who had come to Paris in a jacket she'd made herself and sat in the front row and watched her uncle's name said, in public, in the city where it had been buried, by someone with the power to say it. It's in the room tonight, Evelyn said. His name is in this room. Her mother was quiet for a moment, then she said, Take me to her. They crossed the room together, the woman who had built an empire, and the woman who had come home to correct its foundation. And the distance between them was 12 steps in 30 years, and one wooden box full of blue ink drawings, and the specific human weight of a wrong finally being named, not erased, because some things cannot be erased and should not be, because erasure is what started all of this, and what was being built in its place was something harder and more honest and less comfortable and true. Adele looked up as they approached. She looked at Serafina Vale directly, without flinching, with the eyes of someone who has had a long time to decide how they will hold this moment when it finally arrives. Serafina stopped in front of her, did not extend her hand, did not speak immediately, just stood in the full weight of the moment, without the architecture of managed composure, without performance, without any of the 50 years of careful construction stripped away by the specific gravity of standing in front of someone you have wronged and having nothing left to offer but your actual face. I know it's not enough, Serafina said. I know that. Adele looked at her for a long moment. No, she said. It's not enough. A beat. But it's a beginning, Adele said, and my uncle believed in beginnings. The cathedral light fell across all 3 of them, even and unhurried, the way light falls on things that have finally been brought into the open, not gently, not dramatically, just honestly, the way illumination actually works, which is that it shows everything and makes no distinctions and asks only that you look. Evelyn stood between the 2 women and felt the room around her. The names in the lining of the garments, the people who had sat in the front row, the wooden box now in Adele's safekeeping, The statement in the program, the board meeting, the train from Lyon, the Chicago apartment, the 7 months of rubber-soled shoes and invisible work, and the question she had come to answer. Who are you when nobody is impressed by you? She knew now. She was the person who, when she found the wrong, named it. When she found the buried name, restored it. When she found the structure was false, rebuilt it honestly, at cost, without guarantee. She understood exactly the person her mother's work, all of it, the stolen foundation and the genuine talent built above it, the crime and the craft together, had somehow, despite everything, made. That was the most complicated truth of all. And she held it, the way you hold things that don't resolve cleanly without setting it down. Outside the cathedral beside the Seine, Paris continued in its ancient, indifferent way. The river moved. The lights held on the water. The city that had built and rebuilt and buried again, more stories than could ever be counted, kept doing what cities do, absorbing everything, requiring nothing, offering no verdict on the people who moved through it, except the one they eventually gave themselves. Evelyn stood inside the warm light of the cathedral and felt, for the first time in longer than she could precisely locate, the specific and uncomplicated weight of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Not arrived, not finished, not forgiven of complexity or relieved of cost, just present, exactly here. And that, in the end, was enough to keep going.